Okay, Loki is over, so let's talk paradoxes, causal loops, and my favourite time travel solution.
I know what kind of god I need to be. For you. For all of us.
Now, before I get into the whole sciencey idea around time travel, I wanted to do a summary for anyone who might actually be struggling with understanding or following along with what the hell is going on with all these timelines and these multiverses. So here's where I'm at with it. Loki, the TV show, deals with the sacred timeline. One timeline for each variant in a multiverse. Now, new branching timelines get created when people's actions are outside of what's expected for the sacred timeline. So the Avengers were expected to travel back in time to collect the Infinity Stones, but Loki was not expected to escape. He was supposed to go on to be on Asgard when the Dark Elves break in, to be with Thor for Ragnarok, to die at the hands of Thanos. So, when he does escape, he creates a new timeline for his variant, one that branches off and one that the TVA must prune to maintain the sacred timeline. He Who Remains is then holding this timeline together along this sacred path, which introduces the discussion around free will that Sylvie is fighting for. Because if He Who Remains guards one path for all variants, then no one has the freedom to make their own choices. However, we learn that one of the choices that they would make if they had the freedom to, for the variants of He Who Remains, is to conquer. Not just a single universe, but to cross others and conquer the multiverse. Now, this is the reason for holding on to the sacred timeline, for removing free will so that He Who Remains can control the actions of his own variants and never allow Kang the Conqueror to be. Now, at the end of season 1, when Sylvie removes He Who Remains, the sacred timeline is no longer maintained, and infinite branches of alternate timelines for all variants are allowed to be created. And this is where we enter season 2, which is a beautiful time travel romp. So now we have multiple universes creating multiple timelines, and we're adding time travel to the mix. So let's get into the sciencey side of things. Now, in general, when we talk about time travel in science, of course we say that it can't be done. And Loki season 2 basically took a whole bunch of different paradoxes and used them all, which I loved. So let's talk about some of my favourite ones to feature. Starting with a bootstrap paradox. Now, these are events that violate causality. That nifty idea that every effect has a cause that must happen first. Well, bootstrap paradoxes allow for changes to the past, so that the event ultimately causes itself. Now, in the first episode of Loki, when we meet Obi, Loki time slips backwards and changes events. In this context, he's changing Obi's knowledge about what needs to be done, which we then see happen in real time in the future with Obi and Mobius's conversation. This is real-time dynamic memory updating, and I love it so much. This is hands down my favorite scene of the whole series. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is an information paradox, and this is when information is created from nothing. For example, the TVA handbook. So Obi says that he learned everything about the TVA from notes left by Timely. But we know that Renslayer dropped the TVA handbook through young Timely's window, and so he knows everything about the TVA from Obi's handbook. If Timely only knows all the information because of Obi's handbook, but Obi only wrote the handbook because of the information from Timely, who knew it first? The information comes from nowhere. It's a causal loop with no solution. The next example is a predestination paradox. Now, this is specific to going back in time to prevent some past event, and we get this a lot in the final episode, of course, again. Loki trying to change the order or the timing of events to allow for Timely to get the throughput multiplier in place and then return. But one of my absolute favourite examples and one of my favourite solutions to time travel paradoxes is called Novikov's self-consistency principle. Now, to me, this just makes sense. The idea was originally developed by Igor Novikov, a theoretical physicist back in the 80s, and it simply says that if you want to travel backwards in time and have no paradoxes, then only self-consistent events can occur. So you might have heard that there are some solutions to general relativity that suggests ways to form a closed loop. They're referred to as closed time-like curves. Now, these loops would lead back to the same point in space and time, but they must remain consistent with the universal laws of physics, and so only self-consistent events can occur. So anything that you do in the past must have already been a part of history. You just didn't know it. It's not necessarily a past event, but I think a really good example of something like this is Loki pruning himself. This is a self-consistent event. When past Loki time slips to the future and sees Sylvie in the elevator, he's confused. He's nearly out of time, and then out of nowhere, he gets pruned. So he sets off to try to understand why Sylvie was at the TVA, which in turn causes Sylvie to be at the TVA. It causes his future self to be in the corridor at the right time to prune him before the clock runs out. He was always going to end up in that corridor because of events past him sets in motion due to what he observes in the future. Now, the last thing that I want to bring up, and it's kind of a secondary option for me in terms of time travel solutions, but it's very fictional. But I do also think that it is the basis of time travel in the MCU, and that is a variation of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. What we're talking about is interacting multiple universes. So the many worlds interpretation relates to the measurement problem, and you can check out my video on everything, everywhere, all at once for more information about the theory around this. But essentially, what we're talking about is the emergence of many universes. However, by scientific definition, they are non-interacting. They don't communicate with each other. But when we come into time travel stories, or particularly what I think is happening in the MCU, is that we take this and we say, well, what if they were interacting? So when you time travel, you actually move to another timeline. You can't change the future of your original timeline, but you can create a new branch, a new timeline, and a new future. Now, in general, I know that some people feel that the rules laid out in the MCU have been violated by the MCU themselves, but I actually think it's just because it's a complicated web of multiverses and multiple timelines and then time travel stories thrown in. And it's always going to be confusing. But once we get our heads around what's going on here, I honestly believe it will be epic. So to close out where we are in the whole mess of multiverses and timelines, at the end of Loki Season 2, the throughput multiplier doesn't work and Loki now has a decision to make. He either kills Sylvie so that she never kills He Who Remains and the timeline is saved along with the TVA. He allows He Who Remains to die and the loom to fail, which then will reset, clear all the extra branches, maintain the sacred timeline, but destroy the TVA. So what does he do? Loki, our Loki, the one who we have followed faithfully for 12 years of character, evolution, and redemption, arguably the best villain arc in all of the MCU, is determined to find a different path, to not have to make that choice. And he takes the only path, the only ending really that we could have actually gotten. God Loki, maintaining all the branches of the timeline, allowing them to grow into the tree of life, on his throne, filled with glorious purpose, for you, for all of us, for all of time.
I might just wait here for a little bit. Let time pass.
Thanks for watching. I'm Abby, I'm a physicist and a self-proclaimed nerd, and I am on a journey to teach you about the science behind some of my favourite corners of pop culture. Now, if you want to know more about many worlds and quantum mechanics, then check out my video on everything, everywhere, all at once. And if you have any topics that you'd like me to cover, then do please leave a comment. Thanks, bye!